The oil in your pan right now, the one you've been told is the healthy choice, went through a factory process that includes bathing seeds in a petroleum solvent, heating them past 270 degrees Celsius, and chemically removing the smell. Because without that last step, the oil would smell rancid straight out of the bottle. That's not an exaggeration. That's the standard industrial process for the 7 brands we're going to name today. We went through decades of nutrition research, regulatory documents, and 2 clinical studies whose data was deliberately held back from publication for nearly 40 years. What we found should be part of every conversation about what American families are cooking with. Stay with me through this one, because the part that genuinely disturbed me is something most people doing this research never mention. I'll get there. But to understand why it matters, you need to understand what's actually happening in that bottle first. This isn't about perfection. It's about understanding what you're actually dealing with. Let's get into it. Most people assume vegetable oil comes from vegetables. That's a reasonable assumption. It says vegetable on the label. Here's what it actually comes from. Seeds, canola seeds, soybeans, corn kernels, cottonseed, safflower seeds. And the gap between how people imagine this oil is made versus how it's actually made is enormous. Cold pressing, the method used for olive oil, for sesame oil, for oils that have been around for thousands of years, mechanically squeezes the oil out using pressure alone. No heat above what's generated by the press itself. No solvents, no chemical processing. Industrial seed oil production looks nothing like that. The seeds get heated first, temperatures between 120 and 200 degrees Celsius. Then, they're submerged in hexane, a petroleum-derived solvent, to extract the remaining oil. What comes out at that stage is called crude oil, and it cannot go directly into a bottle. It has to be degummed, bleached, and then deodorized. That deodorization step uses steam distillation at temperatures up to 270 degrees Celsius. Why? Because the natural odor of the oil at this stage in the process, before deodorization, is described by food scientists as rancid. The deodorization doesn't eliminate every problem created by that processing, and that's where the science starts getting uncomfortable. Here's something the label on your Wesson canola or Crisco vegetable oil will never tell you. These oils are extremely high in polyunsaturated fatty acids, specifically linoleic acid and omega-6 fatty acid. Polyunsaturated fatty acids are chemically unstable under heat. That matters because you're heating this oil in a pan. When linoleic acid is exposed to heat, standard cooking temperatures, nothing extreme, it undergoes something called lipid peroxidation. The chemical bonds in the fat break down. Free radicals are generated, and among the specific compounds produced in that breakdown, one has attracted serious research attention. A molecule called 4-hydroxynonenal, or 4-HNE. Dr. Martin Grootveld, professor of bioanalytical chemistry at De Montfort University, has spent over 2 decades studying this. Research from his lab, including work published in Free Radical Biology and Medicine, documented elevated 4-HNE concentrations in vegetable oils heated to standard cooking temperatures. In laboratory conditions, these aldehyde levels were linked to cellular toxicity. 4-HNE doesn't stay in the pan. It goes into the food. And once consumed, it's associated in peer-reviewed literature with oxidative stress, LDL oxidation, and inflammation markers. Now here's the context that changes everything. In 1900, researchers estimate the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio in the American diet was roughly 4:1. Today, according to a 2002 paper by Dr. Artemis Simopoulos in Biomedical Pharmacotherapy, that ratio sits between 15:1 and 17:1 in Western diets. That shift happened almost entirely because of one thing: the rise of seed oil consumption across the 20th century. But the chemistry isn't even the most disturbing part of this story. What I'm about to show you is, in 1968, one of the most rigorous dietary fat experiments ever conducted began in the United States. Over 9,000 participants, Minnesota state hospitals and nursing homes. The researchers replaced saturated fat in participants' diets with linoleic acid-rich corn oil, exactly the kind of intervention being recommended by dietary guidelines at the time. The lead researcher was Dr. Ivan France. The study ran until 1973, and then the data disappeared, not published, not referenced, not part of the conversation that shaped American dietary recommendations for the next 4 decades. In 2011, Dr. France's son found the original data while cleaning out his father's belongings. A box in the garage. He brought it to Dr. Christopher Ramsden at the National Institutes of Health. Ramsden's team analyzed what had been sitting in that box. They published their findings in the BMJ in 2016. What did the data actually show? Participants who replaced saturated fat with corn oil did lower their cholesterol. That part worked exactly as expected, but their rates of cardiovascular death were higher than the control group, not lower. For every 30-point reduction in cholesterol, the risk of death from any cause was 22% higher in the intervention group. The exact opposite of what the dietary guidelines were built on. Dr. Ramsden told the BMJ that the original researchers appeared to have been aware the results contradicted the dominant hypothesis and chose not to publish them. An almost identical pattern emerged from the Sydney Diet Heart Study, also recovered, also reanalyzed by Ramsden's team, also published in the BMJ, this time in 2013. Same intervention, same result. The group that replaced saturated fat with linoleic acid-rich oils had significantly higher cardiovascular mortality. These are not fringe papers. They are NIH-led analyses published in one of the world's most respected peer-reviewed medical journals. And the oils those studies were testing? Chemically, they're what's inside 6 of the 7 bottles we're about to name. Let's be specific because that's what you came here for. Crisco Pure Vegetable Oil. Soybean oil. High linoleic acid content. What Dr. Catherine Shanahan documents in Deep Nutrition is that soybean oil degrades faster under heat than monounsaturated or saturated alternatives. This is the oil in more American kitchens than any other single product. Wesson Canola Oil. Standard hexane-extracted deodorized canola. The canola plant was bred in Canada in the 1970s, specifically to reduce erucic acid levels in rapeseed. The oil isn't inherently toxic unheated, but its oxidative stability under high heat is significantly lower than olive oil, something Wesson's marketing has never been transparent about. Mazola corn oil. This one warrants a specific call-out. Mazola ran an advertising campaign claiming corn oil reduces cholesterol more effectively than extra virgin olive oil. That claim was based on a study funded by ACH Food Companies, which owns Mazola. Dr. Philip Calder at the University of Southampton has noted the documented tendency for industry-funded nutrition research to favor the funding company's product. That's not an accusation, it's a pattern with decades of documentation behind it. Fleischmann's. This brand's history includes decades of partially hydrogenated oil products, which create trans fatty acids. The FDA finally ordered trans fats phased out in 2018, reversing its own GRAS, generally recognized as safe designation. The reversal came roughly 40 years after research linking trans fats to cardiovascular disease was published. That 40-year gap has a name in regulatory circles. The GRAS self-certification loophole. Companies designating their own ingredients as safe without independent FDA review. A 2010 Government Accountability Office report found this process lacked adequate oversight. 365 Whole Foods canola oil. Organic label. Not cold-pressed. Organic certification applies to how the crop was grown, not how the oil was processed. The hexane extraction and high heat deodorization that applies to conventional canola oil applies here too. The premium price does not buy a different extraction process unless the label specifically says expeller pressed. Most people don't know that. Now you do. If you've been paying more for this thinking, It's fundamentally different from store-brand canola. Drop that in the comments. I genuinely want to know how widespread this assumption is. Great value vegetable oil. Walmart's store brand, typically a soybean oil blend. Soybean oil now accounts for approximately 36% of all fat and oil consumed in the United States, according to USDA Economic Research Service data. The low price reflects processing efficiency, not ingredient quality. These two things are not the same. Kirkland's signature soybean oil. The reason this one warrants specific attention isn't the oil itself, it's the volume. Costco's format means families buying Kirkland soybean oil are often using it as their primary cooking fat in large quantities across high-heat applications multiple times a day. The research on lipid peroxidation addresses chronic exposure. No product illustrates chronic exposure more directly than a bulk cooking oil that lasts a household 3 months. Before anything else, none of this means that occasional use of these oils at low temperatures is a documented catastrophe. The research on oxidative stress and 4-HNE is about frequency and heat level. That's the variable, not a single bottle. But if any of these 7 oils are your daily high-heat cooking fat, here's exactly what the evidence suggests you do. For high-heat cooking, searing, roasting, anything above 200 degrees Celsius, switch to avocado oil, refined coconut oil, ghee, or beef tallow. These fats are predominantly monounsaturated or saturated, meaning they don't carry the unstable double bonds that make polyunsaturated fatty acids break down under heat. Avocado oil has a smoke point around 270 degrees Celsius and doesn't generate the same aldehyde cascade. Yes, it costs more, roughly 3 to 4 times the price of canola at retail. Whether that matters to you is your call, but that's the real trade-off. If budget is the constraint, extra light olive oil, higher smoke point than extra virgin, significantly lower linoleic acid content than canola or soybean, and available at most major retailers at a price point close to standard cooking oils. It's not perfect for every application, but it's a meaningful improvement for everyday use. At minimum, 2 rules regardless of what you use. Never reuse oil that's been heated to high temperatures. Repeated heating compounds the lipid peroxidation problem dramatically. And if you see a bottle labeled vegetable oil without any further specification, you're almost certainly looking at soybean oil. The label is legally permitted to say vegetable for a product that contains no vegetables. One label habit that actually matters. If it says expeller pressed or cold pressed, the hexane extraction step is absent. That's a real difference the standard label is not required to tell you. Here's the thing that stays with me after going through all of this research. The oils that dominate American grocery store shelves didn't get there because of rigorous long-term human outcome studies. They got there because of post-war agricultural surplus, industry lobbying, and dietary guidelines built on research that, when the full datasets were finally recovered and reanalyzed, told a fundamentally more complicated story. A researcher's son found 40 years of buried data in a garage box. That's not a conspiracy. That's how slowly the correction of medical consensus can travel. The bottle on your counter is not the enemy. But understanding what's inside it, how it was made, and what the evidence your guidelines were built on actually showed, that's information you're entitled to have. If any of this intersects with a health condition you're actively managing, take it to your doctor. This is a starting point, not a prescription. But it is a starting point worth taking seriously. Remember, the front of the package is marketing. The truth is always behind the label.